My name is John Painter, and I grew up here in Maine, in Owl's Head, just up the coast from here, not very far, about 20 minutes or so in Owl's Head. And I grew up in a fishing family, and I commercially lobstered when I was younger before deciding to go to college. A little bit later in the season, in February, I was out on the bay hauling crab traps, and I had one too many rollers come in sloshing redfish juice in my face, and I had, I got some redfish bone under my fingernails, and I said, it's maybe a better way to make a living. I don't know, maybe there is, but I went ashore. Next day I got a job at McDonald's and started applying to colleges. In fact, I wanted to get as far away from Maine at the time as I could. And I went to a small liberal arts college in Washington State, the Evergreen State College. And I went there to study marine biology. I wanted to grow mussels. And at the time, I think it was only Great Eastern Mussel Farms in Maine. And I had an issue with them because they were still primarily dragging for their mussels. So of course, when you eat a mussel that's been raised on the ocean bed, it tends to have pearls in it. So I had the idea, because I'd been reading about lantern nets, which were a little bit novel at the time, but in Puget Sound, that has a very strong Japanese and Asian and Southeast Asian influence in the communities there. They were growing mussels in lantern nets. So I went there to study marine biology, and I did for my first year until I had a marine biology professor, Janet Ott, who was doing a organic chemistry class, and she had a grant to study the effects of alcohol on goldfish. And I just thought, I thought it was so cool that you could have a career studying fish getting drunk, basically, which they do, that I switched majors from marine biology into psychology, and I stayed there ever since. That said, I grew up here. I never gave up my connection to the commercial fisheries and the coast. I maintained, even though I gave up my commercial license, I maintained a recreational lobster license for many years. I still have it. And then I think it was, during the pandemic, when we were all social distancing and everything, that I kind of was just out on the water more, doing my own thing. And I'd always had green crabs and traps, always caught them on the shore as a kid. But I just, started to notice things had started to change a lot. There were not as many clams in Ballahat Cove as there used to be. Just walking down to my cove, I still have a cottage on the cove where I grew up. There's always green crabs washed up on the shore in the spring because they're shedding, of course. And I was like, what is going on? And I started reading. And guess what? One of the top reasons that there aren't as many soft shell clams on the coast anymore. Green crabs, yeah. So each green crab can eat upwards of 20 soft shell clams a day. A female green crab can have upwards of 186,000 eggs on it. So you start thinking about that and just how many clams we had here. And I just got interested, and I thought, I'd like to do something. I don't know what, but I want to do something. So I got a commercial green crab license. So that was, I think, 2020 that I did that. And there's not much of a market for them, right? They're an invasive species. They're kind of an oddball at that, at least in Maine. And that first year or two, I was using them for compost. When I got the soft shell crabs, I ate them, but I wasn't quite sure what to do with them. So I just kept reading and talking to people and doing all those things that you try to do to understand something. So I did that, and it was really last year in 2023. It was actually the winter of 2022 when I said, I need to do something or get off the pot, right? And I decided that I was going to really get into this. So I already had the commercial license, and I figured I'm just going to start catching them and figure out what the markets are. And not really knowing what to do or where to go or who to talk to. And after a while, it became pretty apparent that there's actually a fairly robust market for green crabs already. Of course, it's in southern New England for bait, for tog primarily. So you get down into New York, New Jersey, in that area, and it's a pretty sizable market. There are some challenges for Mainers to get green crabs down there. The two biggest challenges are the transportation, the cost of transportation, holding them. Although there are some people that are doing that because the reward is not bad. They go for about $5 a pound in New Jersey. That's at the bait dealer, right? So this is one of those things where there are some probably dirty tricks going on, where there are some bigger bait dealers that are really manipulating prices and keeping them quite suppressed. So in Maine, I get about $1 a pound, although this fall, one of my friends, Tae Chong, who's with the Maine Chamber of Commerce, he and some fishermen from the Khmer community, they were getting $1.50 a pound at the Portland Pier. So that's an interesting and I think important improvement potentially for the price. So there is a market for them, but it's not very close. That left me with really trying to think of those things that I could do here in Maine. And I got to realizing that there are already companies that do fertilizers with lobster shell, which, by the way, green crabs are a great fertilizer. But there's already people doing that, and I wanted to find something that was a little bit more entertaining or interesting or romantic even than fertilizer, right? So there is something about, for those of you who've tried the bisque, there is something about green crab bisque, and there are a lot of dishes you can make with it where, you know, you can sit down with others, you can have a conversation. And it's something that's very human, right? Eating together. And you have these experiences, these shared experiences together. And it's not just about, you know, getting nutrition, although that's a part of it, and I'll talk about that. It's also about connecting with people. So I figured that I would use as my approach, starting to sell them and market them primarily as a food source versus fertilizer, poultry or hog feed, or some of the pharmaceutical things I'll talk about in a while. But there are a number of uses for them that I think have a lot of potential. We're not there yet, but they have potential. How do I change slides here?
Share your screen as well. Realize that you're not sharing your screen.
Yeah.
All right. Do you see the screen share, Lena, on there? Okay. There we go. No, that's not the one.
Like I said earlier, I appreciate the help with this, because this is actually the first time I've ran this presentation. I've done a number of other presentations, but never with this slide group and never with this kind of audience. And actually there's audio to this, but I didn't know how to make that work.
All right. You just need to press.
Okay. Let me run this for a second, just so you can hear it, because I think it's kind of funny. I have the lyrics. If you go to my website, you can play it. This is not me singing or playing. I can play the piano, but not the guitar.
On the rocky coast, where the pine trees sway, there's a new kind of catch that's here to stay. The basic breeding crabs, they've come to invade. We'll turn the tables and make them pay.
Huh? Right? Good lyrics, right? Right? I mean, we gotta kind of have the whole package when you get into green crabs, because there's not much else that you can rely on to make a living from them. But you get the idea here, right? So I'll stop at there. If you really want to listen to the song and the lyrics, it's on my website. But we've done the introductions, and you know, I just wanted to go over some questions that you all might have of me. Anytime you want to ask something, speak up, because I'm not sure if this is tuned correctly for all of you. We'll go over a little bit of the history of green crabs in North America that I'm aware of, the threat, functional eradication versus eradication, and of course, fishing for green crabs, as I understand, that's maybe something that people are more interested in, and where I think the current market in Maine and maybe the US is for them. I'm curious to get a little bit of feedback right at the start so I can maybe speed through some areas or slow down. What are you interested in getting out of this? What do you want to learn tonight? Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned was the lack of muscles, so that they had to change how they were growing muscles.
Yep.
And that the green crabs were a threat to, say, for instance, the mussels and the soft shell crab.
Soft shell clams, they are, for sure.
So I would like to know, is this one of those balances, like you have a species that's really thriving, but then they're gonna peak and then they're gonna drop off, or is this an evolutionary process that we're going through, or I mean, I have been on one of the outer islands for over 50 years, and I'm just pretty shocked at what I have seen as a decline in terms of just the detritus you see on the rocks that the seagulls bring in. I mean, there's just fewer and fewer and fewer urchins and crabs and clams, and
That's right. Yeah.
so what's going on, and is this human imposed, or is climate imposed?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. That is an excellent.
That's a lot
question.
of questions.
That's a lot of questions, but it's really good. A lot of people are asking things like that. What else? What else is out there? Yeah.
Like the ecology of the green crab, and so like you said, they eat 20 clams a day, but
They can, yeah.
it's not, or is it like the adult crabs eating the adult clams, or it's the larval crabs eating the larval clams, and at what life stages between both larval crab and larval clam, how they interact at each adult and larval stage?
That is an
And
amazing
figure they
question.
probably try to get rid of it. And then
Yeah,
within that, kind of the population dynamic, like one thing I've heard is the more you catch, the more they, like coyotes almost, like the more you catch, the more they produce, and kind of how, what you've seen in your
Right.
fishing grounds on that.
right. It's a lot of questions there too.
There's your whole lecture right there.
Almost, yeah.
These
Yeah.
are softballs right now.
Those are actually really good questions and somewhat common, actually. I hear a fair amount, so I kind of know. Or I think I know, maybe I don't know.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Any others? Yeah,
I have wondering about distributors, as like somebody's gonna be managing a kitchen, where can I buy green crabs?
yep, well, you can buy them for me.
That is great, because.
Yes.
I am also just generally curious, you're talking about the price that they go for in terms of bait versus the price that they go for food, and I'm wondering what factors play in, so that's the price differences there, if that's a market thing, or if the market has to be created for it, or if.
Is it like a size thing?
Right, or is it
Restaurant is the
equipment?
size and beats the size?
Those are great questions. Wow, yeah, I like this. Okay, any more?
Is there any regulation on fishing feed at this point?
Yep, and there is, by the way, but not much. And interestingly, even how much the Lacey Act applies is pretty sketchy, because it kind of doesn't at this point, because they've been here so long. The feds kind of don't want them they don't necessarily want to use the word fishery, but the reality is they're here and we need to do something because they are growing more problematic. So there's some regulation, it's very disconnected. And like I said, though you might expect the Lacey Act to apply, it kind of sort of doesn't. It's not, certainly not enforced. And it's really kind of left up to the states right now to muddle through everything with, interstate commerce and that sort of thing. Only the western states and Alaska have said no live green crabs. Everybody else, I get calls from Michigan, ironically. Somebody wanted 40 pounds of them. Yeah. Yes.
The question, people offsite,
Mhm.
are green crabs killing mussels?
The short answer is yes. So the more detailed question is basically any shellfish that spends any time on the bottom in shallower waters in particular, they're absolutely going after and destroying. So that's one of the other things I noticed in Ballahat Cove. This is a cove that's just off the West Keg River in South Thomaston in Owl's Head. The mussel beds that used to be there are not there. And the reason that the mussel beds are not there is because the green crabs have destroyed them. So the question about what's going on and how they work, they're just a destructive, mean thing. So there's actually debate among green crab fishermen in southern New England and Maine about whether green crabs are aggressive. And I have the perspective that they are quite aggressive. So you see this stance, like this? This is such a green crab thing that I experience. And when they do this, I guarantee you, even the little ones will take a nip out of your finger and you will bleed, let alone, a 4-inch carapace crab that does this stance. So this is typically what I see and experience. So you need to be mindful of that. They're not as, I almost think of the American lobster, as kind of the slow moving, grandfatherly crustacean, the green crab is really kind of in overdrive and just, they're doing everything they can to affect things around them or to change things around them. In fact, I really kind of wonder about the sociology of these creatures because they seem to be so aggressive even with me on a boat that I'm wondering, are they really trying to kind of herd me? Of course they are. They're trying to move me away from them. So this is a behavior that I notice in this crab. But they probably got here in late 1800s in the ballast water of ships. That's kind of calculated out based on the spread of the populations on the East Coast and what it looks like in terms of density of the crabs as you kind of move away from the New York area, New York, New Jersey areas. But they range from southern New England up into Nova Scotia. And the Canadians are quite worried about them, probably more than we are, which I think we should probably be more worried. The crabs are now in California, Oregon, Washington, and quite close to Alaska. I didn't hear that they were actually in Alaskan waters, but the Alaskans are kind of freaked. They really don't want to see these crabs come in because of the potential effect they could have on some of their fisheries. So they're nothing to be minimized, I don't think. And I don't think we do minimize them. You probably know this, or I hope you know this. I think green crabs are fairly distinct. The carapace is usually green. There is this trapezoidal shape. I can't show it on the screen very well, but there's a trapezoidal shape. They have 5 spines on either side of the carapace and 3 of these rostral bumps in the center of their eyes. They're the only crabs that are like this here. That said, it's a little bit of a misnomer, or it's not a misnomer. It's a little confusing, I think, when you first get introduced to green crabs. Why are some green crabs' abdomens light green, and why are some kind of brownish red? And that is one of those questions where if you're looking to submit dissertation ideas, use this, because this is one of those things, there's some theories. I have some theories, and it's consistent actually with several of the proposed theories. One of them is that the darker crabs just aren't molting any longer, so their shells are thickening and they're getting darker. And I tend to agree with that, because those are the crabs that when I find them that have barnacles or different types of, seaweeds growing on them, it's usually those crabs that have that reddish brownish abdomen. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that growing on one of the lighter crabs. So that's one of the theories. There's another theory, and I don't know how true it is, because I don't necessarily find this, that the lighter crabs are really in the intertidal zone and the darker crabs are subtidal. In other words, they're in deeper waters that are never exposed. Maybe there's a little bit, because usually the crabs that you find in, seaweeds up on the shore under rocks are going to have the lightish green bellies, the lightish green abdomens, and not the dark abdomens. So maybe there's a little bit to it, but when you're out commercially fishing, well, you're not that far out, by the way. I fish in no more than 6 feet of water, so about a fathom, right? It's not that they're not in deeper water, but whatever you see there, that's the tip of the iceberg at best. The real problem is when you get closer to shore. So there's some notion that it's just a genetic variance, that the coloration is like the color of our hair or eyes or skin is just a variance. So I don't know. There's a little bit of a sub-story there that I don't have a slide for, but I have a concern or a theory that can't really see that on those images. But green crabs, a little bit like lobster, usually have like the left claw will be a crusher and the right claw will be a pincher. All right. But I find a number of crabs that seem to have a left pincher and a right pincher. So I've been talking with a researcher friend of mine, Gabby Bratt at University of New Hampshire, and her first thought was, well, that's probably just because, they've lost a claw and it's grown back. That makes sense, perfectly good sense, except when there's just as many barnacles and seaweed on that one claw as there is on the other one and on the back. So is this really something that's happened recently? It's probably skipped a couple molts. So I don't know. I think that there may be some differences there, but again, this is another thing that just isn't data on this. This is another thing to research. Yeah.
Slides, I have a question about sexing the crabs.
Those are both male,
Okay,
by the way.
like Washington Monument versus Capitol Dome, like on Calamancus, but yeah, so does that apply?
What?
I'm sorry, blue crabs.
Yes.
When you speak blue crabs, you can tell a boy from a girl because of the shape of Rusky. I'm like flinging some science
Right.
and some not.
Yes.
Washington Monument boy, Capitol Dome girl. Does that apply to
Yeah,
genders?
generally speaking, yeah, I think all decapods are kind of like that. Green crabs, so these are both males, and I mean, they have this pyramid shape, if you will. The female, it will be much broader.
Okay.
All right, and it's really, you can't confuse it when you see it. But it's quite a bit wider, maybe a more pumpkin-y shaped even. So it's not that much different from our native crabs, in some ways, yeah. There was a study done, an estimation back in 2008 by US EPA. And this is 2008. This is not recent in my opinion. But even back then, they estimated that on the East Coast alone, annually, green crabs are causing $22.6 million worth of damage to the environment and to fisheries. And they do this in any number of ways, from eating those species that are important for local fisheries to absolute destruction of things like eelgrass. They have this propensity to go into eelgrass beds, dig it up, and floats away, of course, and then you end up with a destroyed eelgrass bed. That's very problematic. Green crabs are also not just invasive, they're also ecosystem engineers, which is one of those things where it's not just that they have an effect, a negative effect on the environment. They change entire ecosystems. And I've talked about this with a number of people that, this past January when we had the really bad storms on the coast and a lot of people's wharfs got, washed out and all that sort of stuff. Now, green crabs didn't cause that. I'm not saying that they did. But I would say that they are amplifiers of those effects. So one of the things that green crabs do, they dig in the mud, they dig up eelgrass. Eelgrass is one of those things. They're in large beds just off our shore. They have this action in the wave, right? In waves on the bottom of the ocean. And one of the things that this action does when you have these big fields of eelgrass is they mitigate the waves coming on shore. So when green crabs dig that up, you have waves that are hitting the shore harder. They also burrow into the mud around banks if you're in one of those areas. I happen to be up on Valley Hat Cove, which is all kind of muddy tidal cove, and they absolutely dig in there. And again, they break down that soil structure, so you end up having stuff getting washed out. The real problem, of course, I think, is that they've absolutely decimated our soft shell clam and mussel populations. And the question earlier about at what point or what size in the life cycle are they doing it? The problem is probably worse than we think it is. So some of the researchers at Down East Institute have found that when they do clam recruitments, if you're familiar with that, when they put out their clam recruitment boxes, that have the big boxes that be sealed with the mesh so that the clams can get in when they're settling, and they would go and look at the settlement boxes the next spring, and there wouldn't be any clams, and there'd just be green crabs running around inside the boxes. And they were like, what? What is going on? What? They were looking for holes in the mesh, or did they not seal it correctly somehow? And then they realized that they were getting in with the clams at that cycle, and they were just growing up with the clams inside the catchment boxes and eating them. So there's even a more kind of scarier thought that possibly they're also eating clams when they're in the water column before they've settled. So there's some real questions. And again, that's another dissertation for somebody. We just don't know, but there's a concern. It was enough concern. One of the researchers, Brian Calder, he believes that the days are numbered when we'll have enough wild soft shell clams to really harvest them commercially in the state. He thinks the day is rapidly approaching when most of our soft shell clams will come from nurseries. That's how bad it is. He's quite serious about it, and we had some interesting discussion and debate last winter about this. Brian really thinks that it's probably not going to happen that you can catch them all. And there was another question about this. So stage-specific overcompensation is that effect where you overfish something or try to eliminate something from an environment, and you do until all of the offspring or seeds that are out there come back with a vengeance. And green crabs are an exemplar of that. We would call it, or I call it, the Hydra effect. Like the beast. What that means is there was a study that was done in California that kind of demonstrated this, where there was an attempt to eradicate green crabs from a bay, and they did. They caught all the green crabs. The problem is there was still green crabs, back in the previous slide, a millimeter floating around in the water column. When they finally settled, what was there to eat them? Answer, nothing. Because what's the main predator of green crabs? Green crabs. Yeah. So this is a major problem, right? And again, I think there was a little bit of a, not necessarily a methodological flaw in that study, although it kind of, because it was a one and done deal. My proposition is, well, why would you just stop? I mean, if researchers already know this, then you should be coming back at different stages and trying different methods of removing them. Because you might have to go with a much smaller mesh, but that's me. At any rate, I have kind of landed over time, not on eradication, but functional eradication, which is that notion that you're reducing the population so much that they're not going to really cause as much harm or destruction as they already have, or are likely to cause without that. So we don't really fish them in Maine, so they're just doing harm. There was a study done in 1968. And I think I sent you did I send you a copy? I can't remember, Katie, if I did. I might have. So, and it was done at Darling through it was done through Maine Department of Marine Resources. It was at what was then the predecessor to the Darling Marine Center. And it was a study of green crabs, their effect on soft shell clams, and temperature. And guess what you find? You find this perfect relationship when the weather warms and the water warm, you have these big increases in green crabs and this nosedive in soft shell clam populations. And it's just a fantastic study. I have the link to that. 1968.
When we actually had.
A little bit. We still have cold weather, but there's some differences. There's some things going on, right? Yeah.
Maybe we'll get to it, but so you've been fishing your code for 4 years now. Have you seen a difference in the population or population distribution in those 4 years?
You know, I'm just,
Classes or-
so I'm a one-man show. I just don't have enough hands or hours in the day to collect the data. Karen got, but I would really like to know. I can tell you anecdotally, I have had some fishermen that fish in the West Keg that have said, yeah, I see a decline in the number of green crabs. Is that a good thing? I would say probably it's a good thing. In the long run, it certainly would reduce that pressure on soft shell clams and mussels, and hopefully they will establish. There's also 2 oyster farms on the West Keg, and those are indeed the hot zones for green crabs. Most oyster farmers, they put their oysters on the bottom for the winter, and when they bring them up in the spring, they're usually crawling with green crabs, because that's just like a free meal. I had a friend in Freeport who said he put his oysters down and lost about half of them, either to green crabs or starfish.
So there are adult green crabs who prey on adult shellfish. They can get through the shell.
Yes and no. It depends on the species of shellfish. So an oyster, no. It's just too thick. And I think it's somewhere, I think it's around 10 centimeters. The oysters are somewhat safe from green crabs. Soft shell clams, they get preyed on all the time, especially, yeah, right. So it's all different stages of the life cycle potentially. Similar with mussels. And in fact, there was something, I don't have a reference for the study I was looking at. For mussels, of course, when they attach themselves to things, they also leave a little bit of themselves exposed. So green crabs evidently are able to take advantage of the beard of a mussel and pull on it to cause that mussel to make a mistake, open up, and then the green crab goes in and gets the.
Crafty little buggers.
They are smart. They seem to have some intelligence, sure. So we've been talking about commercially fishing for green crabs. It's what I do, or I think I do. The similar costs to lobstering, and I don't know if you can see this online, but that is one of the common types of green crab traps that I use. It's not very big. It's not.
Just turn your.
Oh. That right there is a green crab trap, or one of the types. This has two heads. This happens to be called a Terminator trap, if you will. And it is quite good at catching. You know, I don't know if it's Terminator good, but it's quite good. There are traps like this, 2-foot traps that have one head in them. Those are just standard green crab traps. These are legal in the state of Maine. They have an escape vent. This one is actually fixed illegally. I shouldn't say that, but I am. But honestly, I need to have a piece of ferrous metal on there so that when the ferrous metal rusts out, that little trap door will fall inward, and anything that's in there that shouldn't be has the chance to escape if this trap were ever get cut off. You know, a boat hits the buoy, it doesn't have float rope anymore. All traps have to have sink rope on them. You know, it sinks to the bottom, and there's a lot of ghost traps out there. We don't want to have those things. And if we do have those things, we don't want them harming lobster for sure, because that's an important industry. Also, luckily, the old shrimp traps. So we no longer have a shrimp fishery in the state, but the traps, the heads on those pass muster. So probably, I have about 100 traps, and about half of them are 4-foot shrimp traps. So they're already kind of set up. And if you think about it, it wasn't a big amount of time I had to spend thinking about it. These traps, when you finally set them up with warp and buoys and bait bags, yada, yada, it's not that much cheaper than a lobster trap. And for $1 a pound, really? I mean, that's not a good, you know, doesn't make a lot of business sense. So I figured if I can keep these shrimp traps out of landfills, repurpose them as green crab traps, and they work fantastic, of course, maybe a little bit bigger than what I need, but they work great. Why not use them? So I do. And if you check Marketplace or, you know, Craigslist, you can still find, you know, fishermen that have a whole stack of them in the backyard somewhere that are just collecting dust and trapping squirrels and pigeons because, you know, they're just sitting there. It's possible to reuse those as green crab traps, and I would certainly recommend that, especially if you're thinking about approaching this seriously. Not shoot yourself in the foot by throwing a lot of money at it, because the time it takes to get a return on that might be a very long time, or it might not happen. Yeah, I mean, so these are some of my traps. These are all North Atlantic shrimp traps that have been converted to green crab traps. So these were salvaged from a fisherman who wanted to get rid of them and had to take them to a landfill. And I said, you know what? I said, Travis, I'll take them. So I did. And I think that's the sort of thing that you have to keep in mind about this fishery, if you will, that you have to really not go in so deep that you sink yourself before, you know, you've really started. I think it's important to take risks. You certainly need to have some entrepreneurial spirit to do this kind of work. You're building something. I've spoken to a lot of lobstermen who said, you have to do what? You have to go talk to restaurateurs? I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's not for everybody. So if you're not understanding this or not okay with that, then it's probably not for you. I think one of the things I'll talk about in a little bit is this is a fishery that's missing a lot of important components. This was a question earlier too. So for example, we have producers, there are buyers, but in our kind of economic system, in a capitalist system, you usually have what in the middle? You have wholesalers, middlemen. We do not have that for green crabs. So I actually put in a bill proposal this year to Ann Hepler and Billy Bob Falkingham for a green crab only wholesale license, because the seafood dealer license in Maine is just cost prohibitive. I mean, for what you're going to get and the risk you're taking, if you try to hold green crabs and you have to have them, you know, in a licensed tank to hold them for commercial use, I mean, the cost is gonna add up, so several $100s at least for a commercial dealer's license. Nobody's doing it because it's too risky, and if it costs that much, nobody that's fishing for green crabs is gonna go there. But if they don't go there, then you're not gonna have that kind of essential, as much as you might kibitz about middlemen. They are important. There's an important function there, because not everybody can run around, shake hands, and try to, you know, sell their goods. But you kind of have to do that right now. The other thing is, I really have to say I owe this to Tay, who I've learned a lot. He's been a great mentor. You know, he has a very unique perspective. His family immigrated. He came here when he was a child from Korea. And he brings with him, you know, this really big awareness of Asian culture. And that's really important, because I hadn't really been thinking up until that point that, for example, in Maine, we have a sizable, even though Maine is a very Caucasian state, we do have a sizable Khmer and Vietnamese population. And guess what is a favorite kind of food in Asia and Southeast Asia? Not quite green crabs, but some very close species. It would be the rice paddy crab. That's one of the popular ones, but they're about the same size, very similar flavor profile. So Tay did a study in, I think it was 2022, and he went to a Khmer and Vietnamese function in Portland, and they did a giveaway. They had several hundred pounds of chicken and several hundred pounds of green crabs. So within an hour, what do you think they got rid of? Green crabs. At the end of the day, they had only gotten rid of 100 pounds of chicken. So one of the things that, you know, I learned from Tay and some of the readings that he, you know, suggested I would look at, the average Caucasian American eats about 16 pounds of seafood a day. The average Khmer, 16 pounds a year. I mean, sorry. Yep. I'm wrong. Yep. Yeah. But the average Khmer or Vietnamese American eats 96 pounds per person per year. So that's a huge difference. And it's a difference, by the way, if you really take a look at the marketing that goes on with all of our seafood, including lobster. Who's it really being targeted to? And Tay's really kind of hammered away at this with me, that we ignore a huge swath of our population, primarily BIPOC communities, and not really understanding what interests them, what's important to them, what's culturally important. And it turns out that people from Portland in the Khmer community will drive all the way to Lowell, Mass to buy razor clams and periwinkles and all these things. Yeah, right. All these species that we're like, well, you know, why are you eating that? Because there are many people around the world that favor these kinds of foods. They love them. And in fact, when I was a kid, I remember in Rockland, there used to be several seafood markets. And when you went there, you didn't just get something filleted out that was, you know, an inch thick the whole way through. You got the whole whiting, you got the whole hake, you got the whole fish. And that is in fact what a lot of these communities are looking for. They're not looking for something that's been filleted out so much, you don't know what species it is. They don't want that. They want to see it alive. They want to be able to use all the parts of it. Right. It's like my mother did, you know, and I can really respect that and get behind that. And I think that's important to keep in mind for this particular fishery. Yeah. That said, I actually brought with me some jars as examples of some stuff I'll show you in a bit. But potential markets, they are a low-cost, wild-caught, nutritious seafood. I mean, green crabs for $1 a pound or even $1.50 a pound. Where are you going to get protein like that? You're not, except for green crabs. Or maybe insects. Yes, you could for that too. Although I'm thinking more about how do we get them out of the waters, right? They could be used for fertilizer. They are, I've used them for that. Livestock, poultry and hog feed as a supplement. Chicken feed, chicken like them quite a bit, but they do need to be pelletized. Cosmetics, this is something that I've gotten more interested in lately, just because if you process live green crabs, I've handled them so much at this point. They do leave a film on your hands. It's not greasy, but you know, the friction that you get when you rub your fingers together, you know, from your fingerprints, you don't have that. You lose that after you handle, you know, a dozen or so crabs. There's something in them that's so slick, you know, and the first thing that comes to my mind is my wife has a skin conditioner that's made from snails, right? If you're okay with putting snails on your face and hands, why not a green crab? That's what I'm thinking. Anyway, so there's a glycoprotein for sure that's in the green crabs that there's got to be somebody out there that's got a high school chemistry background that's willing to isolate it. Pharmaceuticals, there's already some research on that. Denise Skoglund from University of Maine, Orono, and several colleagues did a study several years ago on green crabs. And one of the proteins, a hydrolysate of one of the proteins that they found was a very strong anti-hyperglycemic. So when I was reading the paper, I talked to Denise last year as well. When I started to think about, you know, there's 96 million Americans that are pre-diabetic. And what if incorporating some portion of green crab into your diet could help reduce your blood glucose level? Well, you said it, not me. But yeah, I mean, again, there's another dissertation here for somebody, and I don't think it's that far away. I mean, this is stuff that the initial work has already been done or being done even. There's a researcher in Canada that's already developed a method to make bioplastics out of the chitosan in green crab shell. It could be any exoskeleton really that has chitosan in it, but green crabs are obviously a very abundant source of that. And last winter, I also started to really get into triboelectric nanogenerators. And those are the generators that are really, really small that capture mechanical energy and turn it into electrical energy. So that means that, you know, when we're walking around and the fabric on our shirts is moving, that's mechanical energy, right? So these triboelectric generators, they're very, very small. And we used to actually talk about this like 7 or 8 years ago of incorporating wearables into our, you know, technology. But we haven't really done anything with it. Part of the hang up has been, how do you generate the electricity, or where does that come from? There's a whole branch of science that's really looking at this. And some of these generators, it turns out, the chitosan from these shells is a wonderful substrate to build electronics upon. So yeah, I mean, that's a little bit more sci-fi maybe, but it is something that's actively being researched. There are papers on this, not green crab shell, but crab shell. So
I'm sorry.
go for it.
Too hard.
Yes.
So you have this material that you've gotten from the crab.
The shell.
Shell.
Mhm.
How does it work? I mean, like,
So it's not it's a non-conductive material. So it makes a substrate that you would, for example, make a circuit board on. It does not conduct electricity.
oh,
All right.
it's not like copper.
Not at all, just the opposite of that. And that's what you want. And the trick is somewhat, it has no conductivity. So the trick is you want to be able to have a substance that you can make so small, but yet be so strong that you can build these incredibly small machines or generators from. And it so happens that chitin, this this material that's in the shells of green crabs, it's also in, all other crustaceans and insects, is wonderful for making this from and is abundant. So it is being looked at. I mean, like, go on Google and look it up. You'll be surprised what you can find. But some of the papers are pretty mind-boggling. Correct. There was a question about the regulations, and you might be shocked, but there's not much data on the regulations. But this is it, 2540. So trap design requirements, track constructed with any opening greater or less than 1.5 inch wide, any length is allowed. Or that is one of those wonderful DMR speaks that they leave it confusing. I've asked for a clarification and I've not had anybody clarify that for me. For some reason, they want the language to be ambiguous, I guess. Or an approved crab trap means any top entry that has a minimum diameter of 3.66 inches. So this is the official crab trap. The shrimp traps, I think probably what they were trying to say, I hope it's what they really were trying to say, is that you can use a shrimp trap because that's the size of the head. It's a long, narrow slit that's in the top of the trap, right? It's usually this shape. So it just happens to be within those parameters, any length. So that, I'm hoping that's what the wisdom is, but I have never received a written answer to questions I have over those policies. And that is about it. Otherwise, you're following basically the same guidelines for lobstering. If you catch something that's not a green crab, you throw it back, yada, yada. Yeah.
I was surprised to hear you say that you have a green crab license. Like how long has it been a fishery?
Yeah, I'm not even sure that people want it to be called a fishery. They've been around a while. They've been around at least 6 years.
Okay.
I don't know. I actually didn't ask that, but that's a great question.
It is, yeah.
Do you know how?
Because I've only recently heard of people really attacking the issue as the climate's gotten warmer, and so I was
Right.
surprised that it's already been a little bit, there's already some infrastructure within it.
So my understanding is there have been people fishing for green crabs for probably the last 50 years.
Oh, okay.
That it was a recognized fishery that you needed something for, I think that's relatively recent.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't have the exact date. I don't know the exact number of commercial harvest licenses out there. I had asked once and I got conflicting feedback. I was told that there was between 2,000 and I think 50. So I suspect that there might have been a lot of people that have put in for licenses and then gone, what was I thinking, right? And how many people are actively harvesting now? I bet there's no more than 15 of us.
What are you
Yeah.
using for bait?
Yeah. So, I grew up in a fishing family. I still have friends and family that lobster. And I kind of made for me, it was a value decision. I did not want to use herring or povey or anything like that. So I used the pigskin, pig hide, because I thought I wouldn't be putting any more pressure on herring. I wouldn't be taking away any herring from fishermen who really need it, because I think that is a prime bait. I mean, it's greasy and stinky, but the lobsters love it, right? And the green crabs, honestly, they would eat that in an afternoon. I mean, it just would not hold up in a bait bag. I've got 3 different bait bags that I use. I kind of use a traditional, I use a shrimp mesh. I have a wire cage with 1/2 inch wire, and then I use the bait saver, the really tight mesh. That does the best in keeping the green crabs from just eating it all in a day, but the pig hide holds up the best because it's tougher. And if you put it in one of those bait savers, it's just harder for them to get it. The problem is they can actually open up those bags, and they do, And I frequently find green crabs that have, pulled that rubber stopper up and have gone inside the bait belly. I mean, it's just wild. But yeah. I do kind of think about the environment. I don't necessarily know that I think about myself. My wife said I was a nut when I bought my boat because it was in fact a cut in half Boston whaler. So Boston whaler is the unsinkable boat, right? So that was a 2003 hull that I picked up from a boat builder of all people in Wiscasset. He was retiring and he said, well, I just never got around to putting the hull back together. So I said, I will. So I got it for $300. But it's been a wonderful platform. Once I got it back together, it draws 6 inches of water. I mean, it's nothing. And I sometimes am, scooting around in about a foot of water. But I don't fish much deeper than about a fathom. Because that's not where the crabs are. They're in the shallow stuff and you got to get up in there. Probably a Carolina skiff would be better, but it wasn't, I couldn't find one for $300. So, I don't know anybody around here that's got a boat that's much bigger than that in fishing green crabs. That's 13 feet. Open deck, I've got a grab bar, but that's about it. Just talked a little bit about the traps, talk about them a little bit more. That top trap there on the left is a commercial shrimp trap. No more shrimping in Maine, so that works. That's a short one. The ones I showed earlier that I have are 4-foot traps, quite a bit bigger. Terminator trap, the cylindrical ones that kind of look like a bait fish trap with the cones going in on both ends. That's a so-called Blanchard trap. And you see my converted shrimp traps or 4-foot shrimp traps. So you get a bunch of green crabs, you go fishing, you happily catch them. What do you do with them? Right? Well, the ground truth is hopefully you've already been out talking with people and not just spending your money and, running up debt because you're going to have a rude awakening. You will. You're going to need to do old-fashioned peddling. That's how it works in Maine right now. There just isn't a middleman. I think if you like talking with people, I think you can probably, I don't know that you could make a living. I don't think you could right now, but I think that you could supplement for sure what you're doing. So one of the things that I think, the lobster industry has changed a lot since when I was a kid, when almost anybody could just get a lobster license. You can't anymore. It takes a long time, to serve as a stern man apprentice and get your license. I was talking to a guy this summer. He said, he was kind of complaining. He said, I'm probably the world's oldest stern man at 42. He was pretty upset that he still hadn't got his license yet. I think that, this is one of those things where give people some hope that, it might take a few years. It's going to take a few years before you get your license, but here's another fishery that you can get involved with to help supplement. I talked about that, green crabs. You can see there's a little one. It drew blood on me. I mean, they pinch, they just do. If you've ever wondered if a green crab bite hurts, yes, or pinch rather. Right there is where that little guy in my lunchbox got me. Bleeding pretty good, but you need to be careful even with the small ones. So yeah, I mean that's something that I think most fishermen would be aware of. But if you're getting into this and you don't realize they're fast and they bite. So we talked about a little bit of the different markets that are, I think, out there potentially or there. Bait market, there's certainly some food market. And I think there are some people that are doing fertilizers right now up in the Bar Harbor MDI area. Right now, I don't think anybody's really doing poultry feed. Only research into bioplastics in Canada Nobody has yet jumped into pharmaceuticals or cosmetics. I think that's probably what it will take, by the way, before we get any amount of them out. It just has to be an industrial application. I will say, if you're not familiar with St. Hours in Massachusetts, that is a seafood company or a seafood broth company. I've gotten to know Sharon St. Hours pretty well, and she has developed a green crab broth. So they sell dried broths and they sell it primarily to commercial kitchens, but also for individual use. So she sells little packets, or she's going to be selling little packets of dried green crab broth. So I think as more manufacturers like her realize, okay, this is a good financial proposition for me because it tastes great, it's very inexpensive, and I can give customers something that it makes great dip, it makes a great soup base, all kinds of things. I think that will be the most fascinating thing I heard at the Mass Traps and Lobster Traps, Music Mass and Lobster Traps event in Boothbay this summer was Shannon of Shannon's Unshelled. She wanted to get in contact with Sharon St. Hours when I was talking with her about this, because she wanted to make green crab flavored popcorn. The broth actually is wonderful. I know it sounds bizarre, but until you try it, I'm just saying, right? You have flavored popcorns. Yeah, it's wonderful.
I know you Maine is doing a lot of like feed research with seaweed. Is there any way to like just tack on green crab to that? Or-
They have,
Oh, okay.
and it didn't go well. They made empanadas out of green crabs
But for feed.
for human feed. Human food.
For cow.
No, in fact, I'm not so sure that that would be a wise thing to do. I'm not an animal scientist, of course, so I would want to find out if things like bovines or cattle, livestock can eat stuff like that. Hogs and poultry are a little bit different. They do have some ability to eat this. There is a company that's making green crab based dog biscuits. I know I've spoken with several vets and they said in moderation that should be okay, but there's no research on this stuff. I mean, this is stuff, again, dog biscuit dissertation, right? I mean, this is a wonderful thing to find out about. But I use them as human food, and that's how I am kind of promoting and pitching things. Yep.
What's the like prospect yield of the poundage of broccoli?
Well, I'm actually going to show you because I knew that there'd be a question like that, because they were like, how can you pack meat into something so small? The answer is you kind of can't, but you can to some extent. So this happens to be Moeke that I caught this spring, soft shell green crabs. And I heard about a recipe. I had to dig like crazy and talk to a bunch of people. There is actually a recipe from Venice for making this wonderful meal that uses soft shell green crab in place of pork. And I was skeptical at first that this would work, but I followed the recipe. I fried it as the instructions go. And it was, so this is basically a green crab carbonara. It was delicious. I was skeptical myself, and I like this stuff, but it really worked. The crab's flavor profile had that saltiness to it that you would expect from a pork product, a carbonara type product. And it was just wonderful. And it held up in the pasta dish quite fine. There's a question, you know, I think ethically everybody has to ask themselves. I tend to process crabs both live and cooked. So that live crab has not been pithed, if you will. Usually when I process a green crab, I cut them in half down the center. That immediately kills them. Do you need to do that? I don't know. I'm not an ethicist, but it just seems like it might be the right thing to do. Cooked, I don't always split them when I cook them, though that is probably the right thing to do. But that's up to each person. I think a lot of times people get disconnected from food and food sources. And I don't want to say that any one way is the right way or the wrong way, just that there are options based on your individual thoughts or concerns about living creatures.
Seagulls aren't asking questions.
The seagulls aren't, they sure aren't. And actually, there's a photographer, Jack Coughlin, you can find him on Facebook, who does some amazing photograph, primarily of sea ducks eating green crabs.
Whoa.
And there's actually some issues with that is concern for lobster, but that's another discussion.
The ability to have compassion is what separates us from them.
Exactly. So I think it's always worth talking about, or prefacing. When I process green crabs, this is how I lay them out. And there's a reason for that, because I've just found over time, if you don't do these steps, it just gets messy and you lose track of what you're doing, and it just takes a lot of time and it gets discouraging. Once you kind of get a feel for where the meat is in these crabs and how to get to it, it's like any other crab, right? If you do this professionally, like they do with blue crab and whatnot, piece of cake. It's not that hard. So to get to your question, from about 14 crabs, I get 2.5 ounces. So you can say, well, that ain't much meat. That doesn't take me very long. It might take me, I don't know, 15 minutes, 20 minutes at this point. No, for 14 crabs.
Okay.
So I can fly through it at this point. But I try to look at it in these ways. So at 185 pounds, I only need 67 grams of protein per day, something like that. So for $1, I can get my protein needs for the day and help address global warming, right? So if that's an option, why wouldn't I at least consider that? I'm not saying you should eat green crabs. I'm just saying it's an option. You're getting nutrition. You might even be getting some health benefit. And by golly, yeah, it's possibly really good for you. There's a series of things that I make. Green crab rice cakes, omelets, a number of pasta dishes, palmea. They are excellent deep fried. I'm telling you, if you haven't had a deep fried green crab body, you really need to. If you like the smell of deep fried seafood, I happen to. You have to try it. I don't know why this wouldn't be the ultimate bar food, because it looks a little funky. It tastes and smells amazing. Hit it with a little Old Bay. It's just, I wish I could have made some here. It's excellent in pho or these types of Asian clear broth dishes. It makes an excellent bisque, even if a green crab swimming around in some of its own broth. It liked it. Oh, I liked it. I don't know if it liked it. And of course, soft shell crabs. The soft shell crab sandwich is amazing with a pickle. It just doesn't get better than that. One of the things that I do, and I have some stuff to try tonight, if you want, is some garum. So garum is a type of fish sauce. It's a traditional fish sauce that was made in Rome during those millennia of the Roman Empire. There was a time when garum was actually more valuable than gold or any precious metal because it was somewhat rare and it was a salt content and the flavor that it added to an otherwise fairly bland diet that made it so valuable. So garum is fermented, my garum is fermented green crabs. Sounds a little funky, right? And it kind of is because it's a fish sauce. The difference between garum and an Asian fish sauce is I happen to like a lot of different Asian fish sauces, but they all have a particular kind of rancid note, which is appropriate, I think, in that type of cooking. Garum does not have that. It's a much rounder flavor profile. In fact, I would say it's much more of just an umami aspect. It doesn't mean that you don't have some smell of crab. You do, but it's more of that if you eat steak that had a nice steak that has some fat, nice marbling or fat on it, you get that whole mouth feel. That's the umami effect. And you get that from green crab garum. It's a wonderful thing. So the process is, of course, you have to have the green crabs kind of crushed up. They're sitting in jars for several months. The longer, the better. A year or two out is even better. And after a while, what you see at the top of that jar is the liquamen. That's at least the Roman term, but garum and liquamen are essentially the same thing. But you'll notice that this separation, and that's what you're after, or that's what I'm after. And there is actually now a company in South Thomaston that makes garum, Maine Garum Company. And right now, they're just using the leftovers from eel because it's all, right now it's coming from one of the staffers there that also makes garum from the leftover from eel processing at American Anagi in Waldoboro. So it's a wonderful, again, recycling of that product. If you've never tried Maine Garum Company garum, you should. Liam Fisher, he owns it. Liam and I are good friends, and he's a master of fermentation. He has a wonderful product. And in fact, he's the one that kind of got me into thinking about different ways of using it. I've got the green crab bisque back there. I couldn't bring any Palmeire's, but I did bring some green crab butterscotch. So if you're up to it, we have some ice cream in the back. We have some butterscotch that I brought. Yeah, you might want to put it in a microwave just to warm it up so it's loose. So this is a very simple butterscotch. Nothing fancy. You can see looking at this recipe, I think almost anybody can put it together. But as opposed to using salt or straight salt, there is salt in it, of course, you're using green crab garum. And this, in fact, is green crab garum that's in this butterscotch. And I think, now I'll be interested in what you think, because I have surprised guests at my house with this before and not told them till after they ate it what it was. They enjoyed it. So I'm really curious, if you try it, what you think about a sweet made from green crabs, of all things. I think the flavors go well together. I think there's that umami aspect. Of course, the sweet and salty thing is always good, right? So putting that on ice cream, or maybe on a donut, or maybe on any kind of confection would be a nice thing to try, huh? So, closing questions? Yep. Yep. If there are any questions, I have resources if you're interested. These are some of my friends you might want to reach out to at some point. Whatever you have here for the presentation, it's free to anybody to use. But you had a question, yeah?
If I understood you correctly, if there are no shellfish, then the green crabs are going to eat each other.
No.
No, I thought you said that they.
So the biggest predator of green crabs is green crabs.
Yeah.
Right. That said, they don't want to go after one another unless they absolutely have to. They will go after everything else. So when they run out of soft shell clams and mussels that are the easy pickings, what else is in the intertidal zone that's fairly abundant in the Gulf of Maine or in Maine, mid-coast Maine? Well, yes, but my concern is juvenile lobster. So we know from some of the research at Manomet that they have in fact found juvenile lobster in the digestive tract of green crabs.
Do they have any natural enemies?
Green crabs.
That's it.
Other than us, it's green crabs. There are seabirds that eat them, and one of the problems when seabirds eat them, so sea ducks will eat them, eider will eat them, And the problem is when they pass them, when they poop them out, they're usually swimming a bit off shore. And the problem is they are carrying, we've talked a little bit about parasites. They are carrying some parasites that could be quite problematic to lobsters. Not that they're not already there for lobster, it's that they have the potential for carrying a lot more to where the lobster are. So there's a lot of things here, you know, there's a lot of things at play. And we don't have enough research. And the irony is this, if you do a Google Science search on Carcinus mains and Homarus americanus, which do you think has more research? Substantially more for green crabs, because it's an international threat. But there's still a lot that we just don't understand about them. I thought it for sure when I Googled this, I was gonna be, oh, it's easily gonna be lobster. Nope. There's lots of research on these things. But there just isn't enough to really understand, especially in our environment, what the risks are. Though we have a lot of information that suggests that it might be worse.
Inside baseball question, but what is your relationship with greencrabs.org? I've written about them in the
Yep.
past. You are
Yep.
main greencrabs.
Yep. So I'm good friends with Mary. So we do a lot together. We're working with Gabby and Marissa and putting together a panel proposal for this winter at the Maine Fishermen's Forum. I don't think they've done one since 2019. So it's about time. There have been changes in public policy at the federal level, or Gabby believes that there's some that's coming as well. There have been some developments with the fishery. There are just more of us that are doing this or trying to do this than there was back then. So everybody felt that the timing was right to put in a proposal. So we'll see if it gets accepted.
Research to determine how many fishermen, fisherwomen it would take to actually make a dent in the population.
So this is one of the big, again, one of the big areas where there is not good data, just how big the biomass is. The belief is it's big.
Yeah.
So this trap right here in the West Keg River for me, on a week's soak, 4 pounds is good. Thank God. Because if you go just down the coast to Wells, Maine, and you put the same size trap in the water, overnight it will be filled.
Wow. Okay.
So this is one of the things that that's why Mike Massey is doing what he's doing, and like on top of it, he dropped out of education just to do green crabs. Because he gets it, I think, that it's a big problem. And of course, if you go further, you know, I was always shocked, you know, in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, again, I mean, there's a bushel of crabs after soaking for a night. Everywhere. That's telling you that there's a huge biomass there. So there is some research, though it's just in vitro, that green crabs, when the population is, I think it's 120 to 1 to lobster, always outcompete the lobster. The lobster don't eat, period. So they die. So that's not in vivo, so we can't say what's going on for real in the waters, but at least in the lab, green crabs, when they get to that size, there won't be any more lobsters because there won't be any food for them because the green crabs will just eat it all. That's what they do. So, I mean, I've had some debates with fishermen who say, well, you know, we catch them offshore all the time. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I understand that, but that is the tip of the iceberg. That's not where they are. I mean, so they're close to shore. And this is where we need to concentrate, I think, the activity. But yeah.
The crab caramel has no business being that good. So like, it just has no business being that good.
Right, and of course, if you cook this a little bit longer and make a candy out of it, I keep thinking, dunk it in chocolate. Right, what, I mean,
Tell this to the ice cream store.
I've said this over and over again. The first person that commercializes green crab, caramel, or butterscotch, just the name alone on one of the ice cream stands is gonna sell out. Just because, what the, who's gonna do it? What? As soon as people try it, they go, so what you're telling me is this is green crabs. It tastes good. It is helping the environment because it's getting the green crabs out of the water. And the cost of this?
Yeah, they're expanding, they're trying to, keep open longer and do
Right.
different things, so.
Right. So,
I mean, no, I mean, it sounds like, and you've probably done this, but, connecting with Maine Sea vegetables. Getting it, maybe doing, get yourself on, TV, local TV.
yeah, that would be fun. Yeah,
I have to go back to your very beginning. thinking
Sure.
About alcohol and goldfish. Just as a note, because NPR ran a story today about, how the scientists have studied that lots of species like alcohol. And that they,
Well-
notice how this impacts, in fruit,
I-
in
yes. So
It's really, it's kind of interesting.
the goldfish in Janet's study didn't have much option. I mean, the alcohol was introduced to the tank. That's right. But
But, I mean, it was just kind of interesting that you mentioned that.
I could digress a little more.
Story on NPR.
Do you know what happens when goldfish get drunk?
Well, they either go after each other or they, right.
A little bit. So you know how they swim upside down because it disrupts that lateral line like our inner ear. And so this is the crazy thing, of course, what did we all learn in Janet's class? The sensation, or maybe you don't, but if you drink too much and you get the sensation of everything spinning, you put your arm on the wall because it takes the place, the proprioception takes the place of your inner ear's sense of balance. So your body realigns itself with, okay, I'm up and down and I'm not spinning. And in fact, I'm not saying to get drunk, but if you do, try it because it does work. It's just interesting. The goldfish would roll in the water because of course, they're not standing on anything solid, so they could not tell where they were in that volume of water. So it was really weird to watch these goldfish be swimming around and then just start to roll over and then just swim around upside down. Of course, that's my perception of upside down. They would swim upside down because they couldn't tell how they were oriented in the water. Had no way of orienting themselves.
Did they go back for more?
It was, I don't remember how many parts per gallon there were.
You could probably finish some Zoom later. I think we can.
In a blind taste test, could you tell the difference between green crab and a different kind of crab?
Yes,
You can.
I can right now,
Are there
yes.
questions on
Not any more new ones.
Just here, back to green crabs, are they out competing all other crabs out there? I mean, are the fiddler crabs and 25 years ago, we got worried about the Asian crab.
Yeah.
Are they all gone now?
They're not all gone, but they're just not as disruptive. We'll see what happens with blue crabs, maybe. I hear people that are pretty freaked out about that. But
We don't really know what they're doing to the other populations.
we're not, I don't know of any research on that. You could probably shoot an email to Marissa or Gabby, and if anybody knows, they would probably know. But my guess is, we haven't really talked about it. Green crabs eat everything, basically. Everything they can anyway.